What's up, Dragon Brood? I'm coming at you with another Ikoria deck today, and honestly, I don't know, you all seem to love these, so I'm gonna keep putting out content till y'all get tired of seeing me. But anyway, let's talk about annoyance, right? I don't know, those of you that don't live in like the southern US, I don't know where else they have them, maybe in other countries, but if you're in the US and you're in the South, you know all about fire ants, right? Like they're all everywhere, they kind of just annoy you, they get into everything, they peck and sting you, and just like they always come in bunches, and it's super, super annoying. I think that's kind of how people feel about red decks. So I'm just going to apologize up front. Today, we're going to talk about mono red. And, please like this video, subscribe to the channel. If you're mad that I'm putting more red decks out in the world, I apologize. But hey, I try to be equal opportunity and take care of everybody around here. Let's get to it. Okay, as usual, we're going to run down the deck list. We're going to talk about the lands and the sideboard. And then on the back part of the deck, or video, sorry, we're going to talk about strategy that goes along with this to make it a little easier to play because it doesn't play like other red decks. So, going down the list, you're going to notice something that these are all odd mana cost. Why? Because we're going to be playing the one Obosh in the sideboard. Obosh the Prey Piercer, because that's what makes this work. Otherwise, we just play one of the other standard red decks, and that's boring. We're trying new cards right now. So, we've got 4 shocks, because it's the most efficient thing you can do at 1 mana, even more so whenever it's going to deal 4 for 1, and that's awesome. 4 Fervent Champs, 4 Scorch Bitter. If you haven't actually played with Scorch Bitter, you're missing out when it's built like this. If you've played against Scorch Bitter, I'm sure you're annoyed by it, but the card's good. 3 Grim... No, we're actually playing 4 Grim Initiate. I think I went up and down on this one. I toyed around with 3 and I went back to 4. And truthfully, the fact that it first strikes and can first strike alongside a Fervent Champ, you can really make attacking for your opponent a little bit annoying when you're playing this style of deck with Obosh. Spear Spewer, we're playing 3 of those. We're playing 2 Weaponize the Monsters, which we'll get to here in a little bit. We are playing 4 Anax, 4 Light Up the Stage. These are all cards that everybody knows pretty well because you've either seen them played against you a bunch or you've played them a bunch. So I'm not spending a lot of time here on the deck list. Like I said, we'll get into the strategy in a little bit. 4 Bone Crusher Giant, 3 Chandra Acolyte of Flame, and 2 Skewer the Critics. The lands, guess what? There are a lot of mountains. A whole lot of mountains. 18 of them to be exact, and we're playing 4 Castle Embereth. And then the sideboard. This is actually a little bit of a cleaner sideboard. I feel pretty good about this one compared to some of the others that we built. The only thing I would say is the sideboard currently doesn't have Fry, and I think there's some room for that. But we're having 3 Claim of the Firstborns, 3 Red Cap Melee, 2 Legion War Boss, 2 Phoenix... Actually, no, we're playing 3 Phoenix of Ash. I actually changed that number just before we get on. 1 Blow Your House Down. Yes, that's not an incorrect card. 1 Blow Your House Down. 2 Tybalt, and the 1 Obosh that we have to make the deck work. So why this version of red versus another version of red, right? That's the real thing. Because right now you can play super small creature red, you can play big red, you can play the burn heavy red, you can play what else do we have? Oh, the cavalcade red is a thing. I don't know. There's a bunch of versions, right? So we decided to go with this. For one, at the beginning of a season, almost everybody who's experienced will tell you the super fast aggro decks have an advantage because you're going to run into so many people brewing or so many people's decks that aren't optimized that you're going to get some free wins at times because their decks just do clunky things they're not supposed to, right? So why not just start from that front and give yourself the best shot? Now we will say the obvious thing. This deck doesn't get to use PowrDragn. However, I will say this. In many cases, the damage you're going to get from your creatures with Obosh in the earlier stages of the game are going to be much better than the damage you would have got from PowrDragn just on that like one or two big turns toward the back end of the game. You could basically be doing more damage to the point that you're not going to miss a PowrDragn coming in on like turn 6 anyway. The other thing you're missing is Embercleave, so you don't have that big finish to go over the top. So that's something you have to keep in mind. Now that said, a lot of the other decks either weren't running Shock or are only playing a couple of them, and because you're playing Obosh, your Shocks do 4 damage now. Your Skewer the Critics do 6 damage now. So really think about that as you're setting up damage toward the end of the game. In a lot of cases, you only need to get your opponent down to like 8, and you can easily just find damage to hit your opponent with for the rest of it. There's also cards in this deck like Weaponize the Monsters. I think this is a very underrated card. I think you're going to see this in a lot of aggro decks because one, it gives you some protection against wrath effects, so you don't have to overcommit to the board. And as long as you leave 4 mana open, you've got 4 mana on the table anyway. However, in this deck, whenever you're playing Obosh, you actually have 8 damage sitting on the table because each thing you sacrifice is going to be worth 4 damage. So that's another thing. So, I mean, imagine you're going to have a lot of turns that might be like turn 1 Fervent Champ or Scorch. Actually, I'll say turn 1 Scorch Bitter, turn 2 Fervent Champ. You go to attack. Your 1 damage from the Scorch Bitter is going to do 2 damage. Your Scorch Bitter is going to do 2 damage. Your Fervent Champ is going to do 2 damage. So if you're on the play, you've already done 6 damage going into turn 2. If you have something to follow up, like a Skewer the Critics on the following turn or a Weaponize the Monsters or whatever, you could be really close to start getting to the end game. You know, putting your opponent in a situation where they can't ever really attack because even 2 or 4 more damage could put them within range of getting Skewer the Critics out, right? Like, it's pretty great. And honestly, I would argue you might be able to play more Skewer the Critics in this list. I don't really know. I mean, I think this is something that's going to take a little bit of extra time to figure it all out. It's possible 4 Enax is too many. So if you wanted to cut one of those in place of another Skewer the Critics, that would actually make a lot of sense. And remember, when you're playing Chandra Acolyte of Flame, the tokens don't actually deal extra damage. 0 is considered an even number. So you won't get extra damage out of the tokens. Even though they originated from Chandra, who costs 3, the actual thing dealing the damage is the 0 cost token. So that's not worth bonus damage. So just wanted to point that out there. It's still in here because it can let you get extra creatures to keep doing damage later in the game. It can also let you replay something like a Skewer the Critics or a Shock and just double up damage and destroy your opponent. I mean, once you have your opponent low and you have a Chandra out, I mean, if you were to, like, think about this. You could Skewer the Critics for 3, use Chandra's minus ability, and then Skewer the Critics for 1 because your opponent's already took damage. That's 12 damage off of 1 Skewer the Critics. Like, that's wild. So just some things I think you should think about when you're playing this. I mean, you're going to have the opportunity to go through a lot of cards very quickly. Light Up the Stage is probably more critical in this red list than a lot of others because you have so many low-cost things that you're just going to be cycling through cards as fast as you can. And, you know, like I said, you have a lot to back up and finish your opponent, and they're all in large chunks of damage. Like, you're able to do 4, 6, even more, you know, off of just 1 or 2 cards. And that is something red decks haven't been able to do. Where red decks kind of stall as the game goes on is you're hoping to land the Embercleave, and you hopefully it's on a creature big enough that they can punch through, and the Embercleave actually scares your opponent. When you don't have that, those games hurt when you're the red player. So this actually really changes things up a lot. Like, your opponent is going to be very, very hard up. I mean, this is the type of deck that makes me wonder if the format is going to shift to having some number of life gain cards in several decks just because of the damage that the red decks can do. Additionally, in the sideboard, I would say consider if you want Fry, because there are going to be a lot more blue cards being played, I believe. You know, even on this channel, we've already made some lists that include some blue creatures. So something to think about if you want to be able to get rid of those. And you can shoot down white creatures as well. And it can't be countered, so there's that. Maybe consider cutting, like, the blow your house down and maybe like one Phoenix or something from the sideboard. The only real spots I think I'd want to cut anything. The blow your house down currently is there just so when you're playing against other aggro decks and maybe it's something like Gruul or a Bahira deck where everything's just really big on the back end and it's hard to punch through, you can go ahead and make it where a couple of creatures can't block and then you can still force through 12 damage or something, right? So there's a lot of things happening there, trying some different cards, and it's actually been pretty fun in just early tests, so hope you enjoy it. But anyway, again, sorry if you hate red decks. This is probably a video you're going to hate that I even put out into the world. If you enjoy red decks, you're probably going to have a blast playing this list. But either way, please, please, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, have fun playing Magic, and I will see you next time.